Louisiana, a story told in books, a place of trumpeters and cooks, of sauces and spice, of James Lee Burke and Anne Rice. We're a land of oil, sugarcane, and cotton, and Tim Gotro stories not forgotten. We are Ernest Gaines and Walker Percy, Mo Willems and Erica Spindler, Mystery, Recipe, and Dunces in a Confederacy. We're a state of kings, earls, and oyster pearls, of Yayas, Houdats, and Tiger Cats, of Roderick Blues and Lockwood Hughes. From the rising tide to the last hayride, we are Books on the Bayou. Appearing out of thin air. Doesn't it seem like people do that sometimes in our lives? Well, today on Books on the Bayou, we're going to talk about a book, The Mercy of Thin Air, written by a Lafayette native and Baton Rouge resident, Ronlyn Domingue. Now, Ronlyn might live in Louisiana, but her book visits the land of the in-between, a spiritual realm unique to all fiction. This isn't just any book. This book, written in 2005, has since been published in 10 different languages. Of course, we're going to talk about the English version today. So to learn all about the land of the in-between and the mercy of thin air, keep that bookmark on Books on the Bayou. Welcome back to Books on the Bayou, and our guest today is Ronlyn Domingue, a phenomenally successful novel, even if it is only one novel, or novelist I should say, even if it's to this point is only one novel, done quite well with that. Thank you for joining us today, Ronlyn.
Thank you, Woody.
And I'm going to tell you, I remember when this book, The Mercy of Thin Air, came out, and this is a dog-eared copy because my wife and I have both been through it, and we both enjoyed it. I remember when it came out, my wife's book club visited you at one of your book signings, and you gave a book discussion about it.
Was that in New Orleans?
This was in New Orleans.
Octavia.
Octavia Books back in 2005, 2006. And the ladies in the book club were raving about this book. And I asked them, I said, well, okay, Domingue. I mean, I went to school with a couple of Domingues. What's the story? They said, well, she's from Lafayette. She lives in Baton Rouge now. And I said, well, what's the book about? I mean, I love the title, The Mercy of Thin Air. That gets your attention. They mentioned the word ghost. And I'm thinking, a ghost story? I'm looking at this nice cover here, and that just didn't look like a ghost story to me. But the main character, I don't know if you'd call her a ghost. Would you call her a spirit? Is that more accurate?
She would call herself a reduction. She's scientifically minded. She doesn't believe in the spiritual realm. So for Rosie to call herself a ghost would be a bit of a stretch. So she tries to explain herself through science.
And of course, Rosie is a medical student when she dies young, or is about to be a medical student rather. And Rosie could explain for us what reduction means, but some of those viewers out there like myself might not get it at first, so why don't you tell us what a reduction is?
The way she looked at it, she turned us to, there's no quantum physics lesson in this novel, but in order to understand this character, I had to research quantum physics quite extensively. And through the course of writing the novel and understanding who Rosie thought she was, or what she thought she was, that was the thing that she came to, was that whatever is left of a human being after one dies, whatever reduction one becomes, that is what she was between life and whatever comes next.
And I want to get into the afterlife, or at least your interpretation of it for this novel. I'm not saying this is your statement on the afterlife for all eternity. I want to get into that. But first, some of the viewers out there might be wondering, why are we talking about a book that came out back in 2005? Well, the reason we're talking about it is it's still selling. It was printed in, 10 different languages in 11 different countries. You have comments from folks like, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer says on the cover, entrancing and ethereal. I would agree that it is that. Jodi Picoult. Everyone knows Jodi Picoult, even those of us who don't read Jodi Picoult. Phenomenally successful author.
Incredibly.
This is that rarest of first novels. A truly original voice and a truly original story. And again, I would agree with that. So how does a young lady from Lafayette grow to be the writer of this successful book?
It's a mystery, I guess. You know, you don't know what course your life is going to take. I have to say that I was incredibly fortunate to go to great public schools with amazing teachers, and if you've read the acknowledgments, I thank 12 different teachers who touched my life.
Well, let's give a shout out to your alma mater. Where did you go to high school?
I went to Lafayette High School.
Go Lions, huh?
Yeah, the Lions. I graduated in 1987. I had a number of wonderful teachers there who really encouraged what I assume is a natural gift. I felt that I was called to be a writer, and I think they recognized that and made an effort to get me access to books and resources that helped me become the writer I guess I eventually did become.
So you graduate from Lafayette High.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know you wanted to be a writer at that
Oh,
point?
I knew since I was 8.
You love to read, I take it.
Yeah, oh sure.
So you're graduating from high school. How do you decide to develop your career as a writer? What's
Well,
the next
I
step you
actually
take?
took a long hiatus. Once I graduated high school and went to college, I thought, well, you know, what are really the odds of me becoming successful as a fiction writer? I mean, just statistically, that was not likely. And so my fallback plan, being a very practical person, was, well, I'll just go to school, I'll be a journalist, which I enjoyed. And through most of my early 20s, I had jobs that I enjoyed. I worked and supported the nonprofit sector, but that deep call to be a writer was always there, constantly there, deeply suppressed because it would be a huge risk to try to pursue something like that. And eventually I did. I felt that I needed to do what I felt I was meant to do. So I went to school, got my MFA in creative writing, and my master's thesis was that book.
And before we talk about the MFA and how it led to the Mercy of Thin Air, you just described something to me, how you were suppressing your calling and your gift to become a writer. It reminds me a lot of what Rosie went through when, let's face it, back in the 1920s, which is when she was alive, there were not a lot of female physicians.
No.
There were not a lot of female medical students. And obviously, she refused to suppress this desire, this vocation within her to be a doctor. Did your own experience help you with writing that part of her at all?
I don't think so, in that Rosie's presence came fully formed. And what I mean by that is, this is kind of a tricky part in my process as a writer, but for me, I don't sit down and decide what characters are. I don't decide what they like to do. I don't decide what they look like. They come to me and they tell me who they are, what they look like, what they like to do. And that was the case with Rosie. So I just simply knew she was going to be a doctor, and this is what she was going to pursue, and that she was headstrong and progressive and incredibly smart and funny.
You mentioned the MFA that you eventually obtained from LSU, right? And I don't think in all the people we've interviewed thus far this season on Books on the Bayou, an MFA program has never come up. So why don't you tell people out there what that is for starters, and then what it did for you?
Okay, well, a Master's of Fine Arts degree program is obviously a master's program in a university or college in which you spend anywhere from 2 to 3 years learning about the craft of writing. Not everybody has to do that. And I don't necessarily advocate that everybody has to do that, because obviously the successful writers you've spoken to didn't choose that route. I did because I needed that structure, because for so long I hadn't been writing. I thought, if I go to school, not only will I have a structure in place to force me to write, but I'll have access to other writers and professors who've been through this before, who can guide me and give me their insight into how to do this better. And for me personally, that was the right decision. I don't think I would have written that book the way I did if I had not gone to school.
Well, you mentioned how you acknowledge your high school teachers in your acknowledgement section of The Mercy of Thin Air. You also gave a shout out to the two Jameses, James Wilcox and James Gordon Bennett, who are both professors in the LSU MFA program, both fairly well-known novelists. So obviously working under the tutelage of experts helped you.
Tremendously. Jim Wilcox, who I'm sure many people know, has written 10 books now. I think his 10th is coming out relatively soon. He was an editor in New York for 9 years, and when he came to LSU, I was in my second year at the time, and I knew immediately he was someone I wanted to study with because of his background in editing. Jim Bennett is just simply a genius. He has this almost psychic ability to find the heart of a story and get you to tap into it and see where that story is actually leading. And most of the time, you're not even aware of it. I mean, he just has this penetrating quality that made such a difference in the way I developed as a writer. And I'm incredibly grateful to both of those men for what they gave to me.
And what's interesting to me about your story, which you've detailed during this segment, is that you were educated in the Lafayette public school system. I don't think we mentioned your undergraduate degree. Where did that come from?
I have a BA in journalism from LSU. So both of my degrees are from LSU.
And both of your college degrees are from a state university here in Louisiana. So we produced you, so to speak.
Yes.
And then you produced a book, The Mercy of Thin Air, that is now written in 10 different languages and is still a seller. And when we come back to Books on the Bayou, we're going to talk. We're going to go inside the in-between world of Rosie in The Mercy of Thin Air, and we're going to talk to Ms. Domingue, Ms. Ronlyn Domingue, about what might be coming next. Keep your bookmark on Books on the Bayou. Welcome back to Books on the Bayou here at the Homer Main Library in the Jubilee Jambalaya Writers Conference. We're here with one of the conference's stars, Ronlyn Domingue, who has written a phenomenally, and I keep using that word, but I think that's what it is, and I think you would agree with me, it's kind of a phenomenon when you have this kind of success.
Yeah, I'd say so.
You know, it's not actually something I think you come to expect.
No.
A book called The Mercy of Thin Air, which has done extremely well, still selling. Gosh, math's not my strong suit, but 5 years later, more or less. And so let's talk about that book. Like I said, when my wife first told me about it, and a writer's book club, you know, raved about it, and they mentioned it was somewhat of a ghost story. Actually, when I read it, I don't know that I agreed with that. When I think of ghosts, I either think of evil ghosts, you know, goblins, that kind of a ghost, or I think of Casper. Here we have a real person who walked and breathed in the 1920s. She dies tragically early in her life, yet she comes back in some realm you call the in-between. Why don't you tell us what the in-between is?
Well, the between realm is whatever is between life and whatever comes next. And I mean, we're not revealing any big secrets. You find out, I think, on page 11 that Rosie has died. And she simply never goes to whatever comes next. So she's in among us. She and many, many others like her move with those of us who still have physical bodies, and we can't see them, but they can see us, and they can certainly impact our lives.
And you have Rosie, and I don't think I'm revealing any big secrets either. She is there to watch and comment on the life of a young couple in Baton Rouge, and you know, either help or hurt or just watch them with all of their trials and tribulations that they're experiencing. And you see there's going to be a connection at some point between Rosie's life and their lives, but of course it takes you a while to get there, which is one of the points of any good book. It keeps you in suspense. But the thing about a couple of things. One, the between. Is Ronlyn Domingue making any kind of statements about the afterlife by creating this between for this novel?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know actually what I believe about what happens when we die. And in the course of doing research for this book, I encountered different ideas about the afterlife. Although I really didn't research the paranormal at all. I've had people ask me, you know, did you research ghosts? It's like, no, I just let the creative process lead me where it wanted to. But there's this Buddhist concept of the bardo, that after the body dies, the spirit hangs around for several days before it moves on to whatever next realm there is. And I thought that was an interesting parallel to this, that maybe, we don't know, but maybe people do stay behind a little while, and that might explain some of the unusual experiences that people have after people die, and certainly long after they've died. I've had people like grab me and pull me in corners and tell me, you know, this happened, I saw my grandfather, or I experienced my mother coming back, and I wasn't there. I can't say whether or not that's true, but I'm not going to deny that maybe there was something more profound happening that we just can't explain yet.
Well, the bardo, the Buddhist concept of the bardo, you said for a few days. In Rosie's case, it's not a few days, it's 70-something years
Yes.
that she hangs around. And
By choice.
By choice. And one of the things that impresses me about the book and about the way you tell the story is when you go back into her life, when she was alive and walking around uptown New Orleans, I feel like I'm back in the late 20s. Now, I didn't live in the late 20s, unless some former version of myself did, but it feels real to me.
Wow.
It feels very real. And I noticed in your acknowledgement you credit a book written called New Orleans in the 20s, I believe,
Yes.
by Mary Lou Widmer, as giving you a lot of details about that town in the 1920s. But what else did you do? I mean, I noticed you used all the senses, the sounds, the smell, and the sights, to put you back, even the language, to put you back in the 20s.
Yes, it is an intensely sensual book. I let Rosie as a character lead me in terms of what it is she wanted to tell. And obviously I need to do some degree of research about the city and about that time period in order to be able to capture it in detail, authentic detail, which was very important to me. But above and beyond that, which is something that we can't really explain, and especially people from the South or South Louisiana, we have a connection to place that people in other parts of the world I don't think do. And I've had people comment, even though I never spent that much time in New Orleans, I have ancestral ties to that city that date back into the 1700s. On some level, there's a blood memory that ties me to that city. And my own grandmother spent time there in the 1920s as a small child. Is there something to that? I don't know. Maybe there was a guidance involved in that process. But regardless, the fact that I was able to bring that city alive through genetic memory or through research, and it feels real to you and other readers, is incredibly gratifying, and I'm very grateful that people reacted that way.
Well, let's talk craft a little longer. What I was also impressed by is that you jump back and forth between the past and the present, and not always at the same time. I mean, you're jumping all over the place chronologically. Anyone who's written anything knows the easiest way to tell a story is just to tell it chronologically. But you're twisting that into knots, yet not throwing me off as the reader. What did you do to make that happen? What were some of the tricks you used?
Well, the story came in pieces anyway, so it was a nonlinear process of understanding what the story was. And when I tell people the story sort of wrote itself, it organized itself, I really do mean that. It sort of put itself into that organizational pattern. But above and beyond that, as we're sitting here, there could be a thought in your mind about something that happened in the past or something that's going to happen in the future. We are never fully present. And I think that the structure of the book is indicative of the way our minds work, that we are never completely just here, that for Rosie, her past was her present, even though she's talking about her time spent with Amy and Scott, the contemporary couple. There's this fluidity about time and place, a non-chronology, if that's even a word, that I think is reflected in the book structure itself.
You see that with the present protagonist too, Amy. I mean, Amy she's here, she's there, she's back in her family's past, she's in her own past, like you say, simultaneously. So it really is, the book really is an interesting chronological, and you use the word sensual experience. And talk a little more shop, you write about intimacy, both physical and spiritual intimacy, emotional intimacy throughout the book. Some people are uncomfortable with writing about that subject because you have to handle it carefully. It could sound sappy, it could sound gratuitous. What kind of care did you give to that to make it not fall into those categories?
Again, that's when I trusted the character. I trusted Rosie to tell her story, and that I would figure out what words were needed in order to tell it for her. I mean, there were parts of the book where I was surprised what came out of her mouth, if I could call it that. There are certain scenes in the book that have a lyrical quality that, for me as the writer experiencing Rosie, no, you're very rational and orderly, and what is this? What are you saying? But I think it was that sort of sensual lyrical quality to those particular scenes in the book that gave her depth and made the story work in a way that was not, as you said, gratuitous.
Let's do a little word association. Just tell me what comes to mind. Okay. Fleur de lis.
Go Saints.
Go Saints. Who dat? All right. The Roaring 1920s.
Passion.
Women's liberation.
Freedom.
The women's movement.
Progress.
Your next book.
Coming.
And of course that leads us into a discussion about what we talked about before we went on camera. You are working on the next novel, correct? It is a novel,
Yes.
but the book will not let you talk about the subject. Nor do you know when the book's going to come out.
I have no idea. I can tell you that I am closer to the end than the beginning, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I simply don't know how long it's going to take to get there.
Considering that you've been working at it for, I take it, at least the last 5 years, is that fair to say? Or does
I
it
actually
predate that?
switched projects. I can tell you the day I switched projects. It was October 23rd, 2006. That was the day. The second book. That is the second book.
You know, it's been 4 years. You had, and I'm going to keep using the same adjective, you had phenomenal success with the first book. Do you feel any pressure to get this one finished?
Oh yeah, incredible pressure.
And despite the fact that it's not coming along as quickly as maybe you would like it to, do you still have that drive to write when you get up every morning?
This book has been an incredible challenge. It's a far darker, deeper, more intense book than The Mercy of Thin Air, so the subject matter I have to contend with throws me off now and then. It's not as easy to get up and write a story like this one was, but it's one that has to be told, and I'm committed to it.
Well, you told us a few things about the new book that I didn't know you were going to reveal. You at least described it a little bit. And Ronlyn, we look forward to the next book whenever it comes. Whenever it comes, we'll be ready for it. And thank you for appearing on Books on the Bayou. And a big thanks to all of you for keeping that bookmark on Books on the Bayou. And just like we're not sure exactly what's coming next from Ronlyn Domingue, you're also in suspense about what's next up on Books on the Bayou. Thank you.